Okay, so my topic is public-private partnership, a foundation to a progressive prison system. So basically, the purpose of this research paper is as follows. The degree of civilization in a society can be judged by entering its prisons. As it is rightly said, and therefore, after entering the Indian prisons, it was understood and realized that there are a lot of problems which need an immediate action. So basically, the criminal justice system consists of these four elements, that is, the legislature or the parliament, which makes the laws, enforcement or executive authorities, that is, the police, adjudication, that is, the courts, and the correction institutions, that is, the prisons or the community facilities. So the current research paper is focusing on the fourth aspect, that is, the correction institutions. So, correction, to explain it further, means reforming the prisoners, and currently, it is considered to be a sole responsibility of public authorities. But public companies or private companies or individuals should also share this responsibility by adopting the PPP model. So basically, the entire research paper focuses on the public-private partnership in the Indian prisons, and we are trying to evaluate what are the pros and cons if PPP model is implemented in India, and whether this model will help us to achieve its current objective of reformation. So, firstly, after research, we could find out that there's a constitutional or a structural defect, because Article 246 of the Indian Constitution, which gives authority to make laws either to Parliament or to state legislature. In India, currently, prison is a state subject under the state list of the 7th schedule to the Constitution of India. So basically, management and administration of the prisons is falling exclusively in the domain of the state governments. And apart from that, it is governed by the Prisons Act and the prison manuals, which are made by the respective state governments. So here, I would like to draw the attention of the panelists that one of the suggestions of this research is that this structural defect needs to be dealt with, and prison should not only be a state subject, it should come under a concurrent list so that center as well as state can make laws on this. Right now, it is under list 2, that is the state list, item number 4, which reads as follows. It provides for the state to make laws in regard to prisons, reformatories, borstal institutions, and other institutions of a like nature, and persons detained therein. Arrangements with other states for the use of prisons and other institutions. So after doing a comparative study of this particular point with other studies, the researcher has found out that Norway has the best prison system, and therefore by doing a comparative analysis, India needs to adopt certain better practices to have a better prison system. Moving ahead to the statistics of National Crime Records Bureau, that is the NCRB. The current statistics reflects that the number of prisoners has increased from 4,88,511 to 5,54,000, and therefore we need to draw our attention to this ever increasing number of prisoners. We need to find out what are the reasons for increasing number of prisoners, and at the same time also work very positively on the reformative objective. Therefore, the researcher has tried to show statistically how many prisoners, male, female, and transgender, have been found as on 2021. This helps us to understand that it is a topic which needs to have an adequate attention, because the prisoners are increasing, but compared to that, the reformatory practices haven't undergone a change. Next slide talks about the problems of the Indian prison system, which need immediate attention. Firstly, overcrowding is a very big issue in Indian prisons. The current structure of prisons does not accommodate the actual number of prisoners. This increase in the number of inmates calls for a special attention with respect to the methodology adopted for the treatment of prisoners. Here, we need to focus that as the number of prisoners are increasing, the problems between the prisoners are also going to increase. So either we need to solve this issue by constructing more prisons, which also requires a lot of funds from the state. And therefore, the researcher wants to introduce this concept of PPP in prison management, because state alone cannot bear this burden of increasing the number of prisons. So the methodology adopted for the treatment of prisoners needs to be studied carefully. The second problem of Indian prison system is the neglect of health and shortage of the medical facilities. Naturally, because of the overcrowding in the prisons, the problems relating to health and medical facilities have also increased. The third biggest problem in the current Indian prison system is the increasing number of the female inmates. Currently, the female inmates in India are increasing, and one of the reasons for this is that they are supportive or they are co-accused with their male partners. But the male partner remains to be outside, and the female is trapped into all this. Here we need to draw attention that as the number of female inmates are increasing, the reformatory practices and the prison infrastructure needs to be according to their needs. The fourth problem is the lack of modern infrastructure. So the current infrastructure of the prisons in India dates back to the British Empire. It was the Britishers who had constructed the prisons, and since then, there have been very small or meager changes in the infrastructure relating to prisons. Considering that the number of female prisoners are increasing, we need to draw our attention to the infrastructure, because female inmates have a different set of problems, and therefore they require better or more facilities compared to male inmates. The next problem of Indian prison system is education. So basically, this point revolves around the concept of reformation or better treatment to the prisoners right from the day they are inside in the prison. So without discriminating about the fact whether they are under trial or they are convicts, education and skill development to these inmates should start at the earliest. Therefore, the researcher has touched upon the concept of private prisons. After understanding the current situation of Indian prison system, we have realized that state solely cannot take over this responsibility, and somewhere this responsibility needs to be shared by the private companies or individuals. So basically, complete privatization cannot be possible, and therefore PPP would be a better option according to the researcher. So private prisons are those facilities that provide all the infrastructure and management of incarceration, and state sends the incarcerated to serve their sentences in such private facilities. Generally, prisons are responsibility of state. However, in private prisons, everything is dealt with by a private or for-profit establishment. The middle ground between the public prisons and the private prisons is what comes with the idea of public-private partnership. Thus, public-private prisons can aid in toning down the weaknesses in each system and thus trying to achieve a better incarceration system. Moving to the next slide. Indian public-private partnership model lacks a proper legislative framework. So the researcher has understood that PPP concept is not new in India. PPP was already introduced by certain prisons in New Delhi, etc. But the Indian PPP model lacks a proper legislative framework. We are not having a proper law or a legislature which deals with the PPP models. So India needs to weigh the benefits and the drawbacks of total privatization of the prison sector. However, it has started outsourcing certain secondary or collateral functions under the PPP model. So the researcher in the paper attempts to analyze these benefits and drawbacks of the PPP model. The basic objective behind conducting this research was to examine the effectiveness of the PPP models in India in achieving the objective of reformation, whether this objective of criminal justice system can be achieved by implementing the PPP models in India. The current status of the Indian prisons is that in India, there are total 1319 prisons in the country, out of which only 15 are exclusively for women prisoners. Further, the report states that capacity of prisons is 4,25,000. However, the actual population of prisoners stood at 5,54,000, which clearly shows that there is a sign of overcrowding, which needs to be dealt with immediately, because overcrowding will lead to many other problems. A total of 5,54,000 prisoners as on 31st December 2021 was confined to various jails across the country. The number of convicts, under trial inmates, and detainees were reported as 1,22,852. Under trials were 4,27,000, and detainees were 3,470. Particularly focusing on the women prisoners, the overcrowding rate of prisons stands highest at 115.8% in the state of Bihar, followed by Maharashtra at 109%. So overcrowding is so high in these states that these states are particularly prone to more problems. While looking at the demographics of prisons, it is also seen that out of this 5,54,000 prisoners, only 22% are actually convicted, which shows that only 22% of 5,54,000 are the prisoners who are actually undergoing a reformative treatment. 74%, which is a very large number, are only under trials, and reformative practices are not implemented for the under trials. So one of the suggestions of this research was that 74% of the prisoners who are under trials should start their reformative practices immediately after they are in the prison, without waiting for their actual conviction, because sometimes the actual conviction period is less than the period for which the person is under trial. We can also not forget the darker side of deaths in prisons, the highest cause being suicides, followed by murder by other inmates. So basically, all these problems are arising because of overcrowding, and this requires higher number of prison institutions and infrastructure. Therefore, PPP is one way where the responsibility of reformation can be shared and the overcrowding issue can be resolved. PPP model through an international lens. So the researcher has tried to do a comparative analysis wherein the researcher found out that PPP is not a new concept. It dates back to 16th century, and it was USA, UK, South Africa, and Australia who have already adopted the PPP prisons model in their countries. But every country, based on their economic and political scenario, adopts to a different type of PPP model. Like in case of USA, UK, the situation is private companies have been hired in order to build and run prisons in its entirety. So the private companies contribute by constructing prisons, and they can also take advantage of this under their corporate social responsibility, CSR. On the other end of the spectrum is a more suitable hybrid system where private entity finances the building of the new prison and operates only certain functions within it, such as the maintenance or skill development. So there are various models all over the world that are being adopted with respect to PPP. India needs to evaluate for itself that according to its democratic, republic, socialist approach, which model will be the most suitable one for India. Lastly, it should also be noted that this system is not only opted by the high income countries, even though their experience remains more. A lot of middle to low income countries, even they have extended this PPP model in their jurisdictions by altering the PPP model as per their needs. These includes the names of following countries: Chile, Peru, Mexico, Brazil, Costa Rica, etc. So the conclusion of the researcher is that PPP does not seem to be a new model. It is the same old wine and new bottle, wherein India as a country needs to adopt a suitable PPP model for itself. So India cannot go as per the US model or as per any other country. We need to find a model for ourselves by adopting the pros and cons and studying the pros and cons of other countries' PPP model. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your presentation.